Tonight, when my mother-in-law handed me that silver box and called it a gift of freedom, the room laughed with her. They didn't see what I saw inside, my own signature, already waiting for goodbye. Something in me broke, but it didn't shatter. It turned sharp. I smiled, because I finally understood. I wasn't their decoration, their symbol, or their silence. They think this is the end of my story. It isn't. They just don't know yet what freedom really looks like. Not the kind you give, the kind you take back. The chandeliers hung low, scattering light like fractured glass across a sea of uniforms and sequined gowns. The air smelled of champagne, brass polish, and performance. Every smile in that room was rehearsed. Every laugh, a note in a campaign anthem no one dared to interrupt. I had stood through countless ceremonies before, but this one felt different. Too polished. Too expectant. The speeches rolled one after another, each dripping with patriotism and the kind of sincerity that came from expensive cue cards. Beside me, Evan adjusted his cuffs. The movement was mechanical, almost nervous. The gold wedding band on his finger caught the light and threw it straight into my eyes. I wondered if he noticed the irony, the glare, the blinding brightness of something meant to symbolize devotion. On stage, Lorna Havelock gripped the podium like a queen presiding over a loyal court. The senator's voice was steady, low, and expertly modulated, carrying through the grand ballroom with effortless authority. Tonight, we honor family, service, and freedom, the pillars of America. Applause thundered. I clapped too, the way one claps for tradition, not belief. Then she looked at me. That look, calculated sweetness, polished concern, was the first signal. I should have seen it coming. And my dear daughter-in-law, Zelphira Grant, she said, pausing just long enough for the cameras to find me. She's served our veterans with compassion and grace. She embodies what this night stands for. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes landing on me, their approval warm, empty, temporary. Evan squeezed my hand, the same silent cue he always gave when appearances mattered. Then Lorna nodded to an aide. A man in a tuxedo approached the stage, holding a small silver box on a velvet tray. The light caught it perfectly, reflecting into the room like a flash grenade. My breath slowed. Something in me, the soldier, the woman who'd learned to read the smallest shifts in tone and timing, knew this wasn't admiration. This was theater. Lorna smiled. A gift, she announced, for your unwavering service and your freedom. A ripple of laughter spread before I even touched the box. The metal was cold against my palms. The engraving on the lid shimmered under the spotlight. To new freedom. My fingers hesitated, but not out of fear. It was disbelief, the kind that no longer wounds. It just hollows you out. When I opened the lid, the room seemed to exhale all at once. Inside was a folded stack of papers, divorce documents. My name, his name, her signature as witness. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then came the laughter, soft at first, then swelling, the sound of expensive amusement. Someone clinked a glass. Someone else muttered bold move. Cameras flashed like fireworks, capturing humiliation as if it were entertainment. Evan leaned close, his voice barely audible. Smile, Z. It's just politics. I smiled. Not for him. Not for them. For me. Because I understood something they didn't. What they called politics. I called provocation. The applause faded. The orchestra struck another triumphant note, and Lorna lifted her glass toward me as if she'd just knighted me into disgrace. The box felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the papers, but because of what they meant. The end of pretending, the quiet burial of patience. I held it close, the metal cool against my skin, and watched the crowd return to their easy laughter, their safe alliances, their belief that they'd written the ending of my story right there under the chandeliers. They hadn't. While they congratulated themselves for the spectacle, I studied every face, every smirk, every careless hand lifted to toast my downfall. It was the kind of observation I'd done 1,000 times before. Different field, same war. The senator's voice echoed faintly from across the hall. praising duty, freedom, and family in the same breath. Words she used like currency. I let them pass over me without response. The music swelled again, drowning out her last line, and I stood still, smiling for the cameras, the model of composure they wanted. But inside, something had shifted. Silence used to be my shield. In that moment, it became my weapon. If this was what they called freedom, then I would show them what it truly looked like, when it wasn't wrapped in satin and applause. The laughter returned. The music grew brighter, and I caught my reflection in the polished lid of the box. Steady, expressionless, almost unrecognizable. I tilted the box slightly, watching the lights fracture across its surface, and whispered under my breath, so soft no one could hear. Let's see how free you feel when the truth starts to speak. The Havelock house smelled of polish and power. The wood gleamed so perfectly, it reflected every lie told across its surface. Even the portraits on the walls, Evan's ancestors in crisp uniforms, Lorna beside senators and generals, looked like props from a campaign that never ended. Nothing here was decoration. Everything was messaging. Every Thursday night was family dinner, a ritual that felt more like a press conference. No one came hungry. Plates cooled while they discussed numbers, polls, donations, and the latest talking points that would bring the Havelock story to the people. I had learned to sit quietly, hands folded in my lap, while Lorna led with her favorite line, "We're not just a family, we're a message." For a long time, I believed her. I thought if I supported the cause, if I smiled, if I played the part, they'd eventually see I belonged. I told myself compromise was the price of peace, that harmony was worth swallowing pride. But over time, I realized something uglier. In this house, even kindness had to be edited. When the dinner ended, Lorna would turn to me for the closing image, a hand resting gently on my shoulder, a soft smile for the cameras waiting in the foyer. Zelfira believes in service, she'd tell the staff, making sure it echoed down the hall. It wasn't a compliment, it was branding. I learned to recognize the look Evan gave me across the table, his polite signal that I should stay quiet while policy was discussed. He'd meet my eyes for half a second, then glance toward his mother. Every gesture said the same thing, not now, not here, not worth it. I used to think he was protecting me. Later, I understood he was protecting them, from me. The silence stretched into every part of the house. The halls gleamed, the clocks ticked perfectly, and every moment was curated to appear stable. But there's a kind of silence that isn't peace. It's suffocation disguised as civility. One afternoon, between appointments at the clinic, I opened an email from a colleague. No subject line, no greeting, just a single sentence. "You should see this. You're in it." I clicked the link. The video began with patriotic music and the slogan, "Healing Our Heroes." The Havelock promise. My throat tightened. On screen, I watched myself sitting across from a veteran, one of my patients, guiding him through a panic episode. His face was blurred, but my voice was clear. Every word of comfort, every soft question, every nod of reassurance had been cut and spliced into a campaign ad. Lorna's logo appeared in the corner. My hand froze on the mouse. The camera must have been hidden in my office, a place meant to be sacred, where pain was shared in confidence, where no one else was supposed to listen. I called Evan before the shaking in my hands could stop. "They used my session," I said. "That was a private recording." He sighed. That weary sound I'd learned to hate. "Relax. Z. It's good exposure. You're helping more people this way." Good exposure. The phrase hit harder than any insult. It was clinical, detached, like he was talking about data, not people, not me. I hung up without another word. That night, I went through the campaign's financial disclosures. I didn't expect to find anything. I just needed to see for myself how far they'd gone. But the numbers didn't lie. The mental health program I managed had lost nearly 40% of its funding last month. The campaign fund labeled Veteran Promise Initiative had increased by the exact amount. Coincidence? Maybe. But not in this house. Not with them. I printed the documents and slid them into a folder, the edges sharp against my fingertips, when the house finally went quiet. I sat in my office, the silver box on my desk glinting in the dim light. The divorce papers inside were still neatly folded, Lorna's signature crisp and deliberate, Evan's handwriting tight and hurried. I stared at the stack of pages, then at the folder in my hand. Freedom, they called it. I opened my journal and wrote a single line. They call this freedom. I call it the first lie. The grandfather clock downstairs chimed midnight. The sound echoed through the walls, a perfect rhythm in a house that prided itself on order. But for the first time, the noise didn't comfort me. It sounded like a countdown. I closed the journal, slid it into the drawer beneath the box, and turned off the light. Some truths don't explode all at once. They begin quietly, like a tremor under polished floors, unseen, unstoppable, waiting for the right moment to bring the house down. The rain started just as the building emptied for the night. A soft, steady drumming against the windows, the kind of rain that carried its own rhythm, measured, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I stayed behind at the therapy center, the only light still burning in a row of dark offices. My screen glowed an eerie blue, casting long shadows across the stack of files spread before me. Then the notification appeared. An email. No subject. No sender. No text. Just a single attachment. record_0731.mp3. My hand hovered over the mouse. Maybe it was spam, maybe a mistake, but something about the timestamp, July 31st, made my pulse slow. I clicked play. Static crackled, then a woman's voice, calm, sharp, too familiar. Transfer the funds before the audit. Use the veteran account. It's cleaner. There was a pause, and then a man's voice, lower, measured, but just as recognizable. We'll cover it with Zelfira's program numbers. She won't even know. My heart stopped. Lorna, Evan, my husband and his mother, speaking casually, efficiently, about laundering money through my program. 47 seconds. That was all it took. 47 seconds to unravel 7 years of loyalty, compromise, and silence. I replayed it once, twice, then again, until their voices blurred into a single sound, a hum of betrayal looping endlessly. I copied the file to an external drive, printed the waveform, and transcribed every word. Each sentence looked worse in ink. I drew neat black lines beneath every phrase that mattered, then wrote in the margin, in my own hand, classified evidence, behavioral report. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hallway, a pipe groaned. It was the kind of sound that made an empty building feel alive, breathing, watching. I shut down the computer, slid the file into a locked drawer, and sat back, letting the quiet fill the space where my trust used to be. When I finally looked up, my reflection stared back at me in the dark glass of the window. My face looked the same, but something behind my eyes had shifted. The next morning, my phone vibrated before dawn. No caller ID, no name, just a message. You deserve to know the truth. F. The letter sat there, simple and small, but it made my chest tighten. I read it again, twice, before the realization sank in. F. Finn Rourke. A name I hadn't heard in over a year. A former patient, a veteran who'd come through my office shattered but determined to rebuild. He'd driven part-time for the Havelock campaign after his discharge, needing the paycheck, never comfortable around power, but grateful for the work. I typed back a single question. What truth? No reply. Instead, an hour later, another email landed in my inbox, this one with a short note and the same file attached again. His message read, "You helped me once. Ma'am, this is me helping back." Below that, his story unfolded in a few sparse sentences. He had been driving a supply van during one of the campaign events, radio tuned to the internal security channel. He'd overheard Lorna and Evan discussing a transfer that needed to happen before the auditors could see it. When he asked about it later, his supervisor told him to forget it ever happened. 2 days later, he was dismissed for breach of protocol. Before he turned in his phone, he copied the audio file he'd recorded by accident. I stared at his words for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then dropped away. He'd lost his job for hearing too much. I had lost everything for believing too little. Later that afternoon, another email came through. Again unsigned. This one contained fragments, scanned ledgers, partial spreadsheets, transfers labeled Veteran Promise Fund to Campaign Committee account. No totals, no explanations, just numbers. But numbers don't lie. In the subject line, Finn had typed only, "More to come." The files weren't complete. I could see where he'd blurred account IDs, protecting himself, but the pattern was unmistakable. Money meant for veterans, therapies, medications, recovery programs had been funneled straight into the machinery of political ambition. I printed the pages on the office printer, the machine spitting each sheet like an accusation. My hands shook as I stacked them, not from fear, but from the clarity that came with outrage finally given shape. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It wasn't about my marriage, or the humiliation, or the campaign. It was theft. It was deception draped in patriotism, and it had my name written across the paperwork they used to hide it. I sat back, the hum of the printer fading into the patter of rain outside. The city beyond the glass was drenched, its light smeared into streaks of green and gold by the storm. I watched the reflection of my office, sterile, organized, unchanged, and realized I no longer recognized the woman sitting in it. I wasn't the obedient wife in the background of someone else's narrative. I wasn't the quiet therapist patching up soldiers while politicians cashed in on their wounds. I was a witness now, and a witness doesn't stay silent. The thought steadied me. I reached for the drawer, pulled out the silver box, and placed it under the lamp. Its surface caught the light. That same mocking inscription glinting faintly. To new freedom. For a long time, I stared at it. The symbol of their arrogance, their certainty that I would never fight back. Then I laughed, soft, almost to myself. "You wanted a war, Senator," I whispered, running a thumb along the engraving. "You'll get one, but on my field." Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the sound. The rain quickened, washing the city clean. Inside my office, I began making a list, dates, accounts, names, each word neat, precise. 3 days after the anonymous email, the rain finally stopped, leaving Seattle coated in a thin metallic mist. I arrived at the therapy center before sunrise. When the city was still half asleep and the air smelled like wet pavement and rust, I unlocked my office, powered up the computer, and began what I quietly named my new mission. I created a folder on an external drive and labeled it the Soldier's File. Inside it, I started compiling everything: patient logs, budget reports, transfer summaries, scanned receipts, anything that bore the name Veteran Promise. Each click, each saved document, felt deliberate, surgical. Every sound of the hard drive spinning reminded me of the field base in Afghanistan, the hum of radio static between orders. Back then, silence meant survival. Now, silence would be my weapon. I didn't move like someone panicking. I moved like someone preparing. I backed up the files to 3 separate drives, one hidden in the clinic's first aid cabinet, another sent through a private courier to an address only I knew, and a third stored in a locked drawer under my desk. When it was done, I sat back, exhausted but clear. Then came the first strike. Monday morning, the system crashed. When I logged in, my folders were gone. All backups within the network, erased. The drives themselves untouched. But the server showed a forced override. Only 2 people had administrative clearance, myself and Evan. I drove home before noon and found him in his office, phone pressed to his ear, the reflection of spreadsheets glowing across his glasses. He didn't even look up when I entered. The words left me before I could plan them. "The files are gone." He froze for a fraction of a second, then lowered the phone, smoothing his tie like he always did when rehearsing an excuse. "Mom said it's for damage control." He muttered, "You're being emotional about this." I stared at him, at the man who used to read field reports with me under a desert sky. "No," I said quietly. "I'm being accurate." His face tightened, but he didn't reply. He just went back to his screen, choosing the comfort of numbers over confrontation. I walked out before I could say more, the click of my boots against the marble floor sounding too much like finality. At the next staff meeting, while others debated quarterly reports, my eyes caught something odd, a faint red light blinking from behind the office clock. I stood up, pretending to refill my coffee, and drifted closer. A pinhole camera, almost invisible, nestled against the frame. Its wire led into the wall and down toward the rotor box labeled Havelock Security. I turned off the light, pulled the plug, and for the first time in weeks, smiled. "You wanted to watch me," I whispered into the darkness. "Now you'll have to listen." By late afternoon, the third hit landed. Every local station played the same breaking headline: Senator's daughter-in-law placed on leave for mental instability following PTSD claims. The anchor's voice was sympathetic, polished, rehearsed, and there was Lorna, perfect posture, camera-ready grief. "Zelfira has dedicated her life to helping soldiers heal. We're helping her heal too." Her tone was the same one she used when consoling widows on camera, compassion that tasted of control. I turned the volume down, but her words still rang in my head. This wasn't rumor. It was strategy, a calculated, preemptive strike. They had fired the first public shot, not with bullets, but with narrative. That night, I called Colonel Isaac Ward. It had been years since I'd heard his voice, but when he answered, the weight in it was the same, solid, anchored by the kind of integrity that doesn't rust with time. He listened as I told him what I'd found: the files, the recordings, the smear campaign. When I finished, there was only silence on the other end. "Finally," he said, slow and even, "it's not the first time politics feeds on soldiers, Grant. But if you go after a senator, make sure your truth is bulletproof." "Then I'll bring steel," I said. When I returned to the clinic the next morning, an envelope was waiting on my desk. No return address, just my name, written neatly in blue ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a scanned authorization form signed by Lorna herself, transferring funds from Veteran Promise Fund to Havelock Campaign Committee. Paper proof. The signature sharp, deliberate, smug. Folded with it was a smaller note, handwritten in the same blue ink. "If you fall, they win. F. Finn." Again. He had risked more than I'd asked, more than anyone should have to. I added the document to the soldier's file, sealing it in a plastic sleeve, labeled and dated. Then I sat there a long time, staring at the glow of the desk lamp against the window pane. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent light, neon, car headlights, street lamps streaking the wet pavement. I reached for the silver box sitting at the corner of my desk. For weeks it had haunted me, that polished little coffin of humiliation. But when I opened it this time, the fear was gone. Inside, the folded divorce papers waited, untouched, like a relic of another life. I didn't feel pain anymore, only precision. That paper wasn't a wound. It was evidence, proof that even betrayal could be documented, time-stamped, notarized. I picked up my pen and opened my journal. They took my oath and twisted it. I wrote, "Now I'll keep it, but for the right war." The rain began again, tapping softly against the window, steady and patient, like a drumbeat marking the start of a campaign. I closed the file, locked it in the cabinet, and turned off the lights. In the darkness, I could almost hear the echo of Ward's voice, calm and sure. Make it bulletproof. And I would. The diner sat at the edge of a quiet stretch of road in Tacoma, its neon sign flickering in the drizzle, the kind of place that still smelled like grease, old coffee, and rain-soaked asphalt. Condensation fogged the windows, blurring the shapes of parked cars and the faint shimmer of traffic lights in the distance. I chose the booth in the back, beneath a wall crowded with black and white photos of soldiers returning home. Grinning men in uniform, flags draped around shoulders, wives crying into their palms. I waited with both hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, the ceramic still humming faintly against my palms. Colonel Isaac Ward arrived on the dot. No introduction, no handshake. He looked exactly as I remembered, broad-shouldered, tired eyes, The kind of stillness that only comes from too many wars and not enough peace. His army jacket was worn down to the threads, a patch missing near the cuff. He set his coffee on the table and sat across from me, his gaze steady. "You're not here as a wife, are you?" "No, sir. I'm here as a soldier." He nodded once, as if that was the only answer worth giving. From the inside of his jacket, he pulled out a small black USB, stamped with a faded military code. He slid it across the table between us. "Plug this in," he said. "It'll autoplay the files, video, audio, and the backup metadata. Once it starts, you can't stop it. If you fall, the truth keeps running." The USB felt heavier than metal, colder than anything my fingers had touched since Afghanistan. "You wanted freedom, Grant?" he said. "It comes with a fight." Ward leaned back, watching me. "They'll discredit you," he said after a while. "They'll call you unwell, unstable, dangerous even." I smiled, faintly. "They already did." He looked at me the way commanders look at soldiers right before sending them into impossible missions, not with pity, but with recognition. "You're going after people who don't lose," he said quietly. "Be sure you can live with what happens when you win." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Outside, the rain thickened into a curtain. Later that night, after I'd driven home, my phone lit up near midnight. Evan's name glowed across the screen. I almost didn't answer, but habit won. His voice came through soft, strained. "Mom says don't come to the army ball. She'll handle the PR fallout." I watched raindrops chase each other down the glass. "I'll be there," I said. "In uniform." He hesitated. "Don't make a scene, Z." "No scene," I said. Just the truth. There was a silence so long I thought he'd hung up. Then the faint sound of him breathing, the kind of sound that belongs to someone already defeated. The call disconnected. The next morning, I opened my email. A message from Finn Rourke waited. Subject line, blank as always. "Use the broadcast." The text read, "They're going live nationwide." Attached was a digital log from the Havelock campaign team. Confirmation that the Army Ball would be streamed across every major network, funded. Ironically, by the very program Lorna had drained, my pulse steadied. I knew exactly what that meant. They wanted a spectacle, an image of control, unity, redemption, and they'd chosen the perfect stage to bury their sins under applause. It would also be the perfect stage to uncover them. When Ward and I met again that afternoon, the diner was half empty. He didn't ask if I'd read the email. He already knew. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a creased photograph, and slid it across the table. It was an old picture. Kandahar, 2012. Me and my medical team, standing in a line of dust and sun, faces half hidden behind exhaustion. I'd forgotten the photographer even took it. On the back, written in ink that had bled over time, were the words, "Serve with honor, even when no one's watching." I traced the writing with my thumb. The edges of the paper were soft, fragile, but the message felt carved into bone. "I'll remember," I said quietly. He nodded, finished his coffee, and left the USB on the table. I watched him walk out into the rain, his shoulders squared against the wind. I stayed a while longer, long enough for the waitress to stop glancing my way. I pulled the USB close and studied it. The scratched surface, the worn engraving. It looked harmless, ordinary, but inside it was something stronger than any weapon I'd ever carried. By Monday morning, Seattle was humming with headlines that weren't news. They were choreography. Every screen, every channel, every morning paper carried the same line. Senator Lorna Havelock hosts Freedom Ball, honoring military families. Her smile filled the television, practiced to perfection, the soft lighting catching the faintest shimmer of tears she never earned. Beside her stood Evan, his hand on her shoulder, nodding like a dutiful son. "Even when loved ones struggle," she said, her voice warm enough to pass for grace. "Our family stands strong." I muted the TV. The reflection on the dark screen showed my own face behind hers. Faint, fading, just as she liked it. Loved ones struggle. That was her way of saying, Zelfira's unstable, but dressed in empathy, polished in spin. I stared at the cold cup of coffee on the table and said quietly, to no one but the silence. They're weaponizing compassion. That afternoon, my inbox pinged. A press release from the Havelock PR office. Army Ball 2026 will stream nationwide. Theme, freedom and family. A clever move. A trap wrapped in patriotism. They were turning a political event into a redemption narrative, and I was meant to be the proof of forgiveness. I forwarded the email to Colonel Ward. Beneath it, I typed only, they're going live. Confirm broadcast interception. His reply came within minutes. One word. Copy. The plan was in motion now, and the stage was no longer theirs alone. When I stepped out into the hallway that evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet concrete. My phone rang before I reached the door. Naomi Vega's name flashed across the screen. Her voice came through fast, urgent. I dug through the FEC filings. She said, Senator Havelock diverted $1.2 million in veteran funds over 18 months. If you can get her voice on record, it's over. I already have her voice. Then make them hear it. By nightfall, Evan appeared at my office door, the kind of entry that announced itself without knocking. He held a small bouquet, the flowers already wilting at the edges. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Mom wants you to sit this one out, he said softly. It's better for everyone. For everyone, or for her. He flinched. His eyes darted away, hands tightening on the flowers. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Z, you never mean it, I said. That's the problem. He looked like he wanted to argue, but all that came out was a shallow breath. When he left, the air still smelled like cheap perfume and fear. Close to midnight, Naomi's next message arrived. Attached was a series of photos, account statements, transfer records, highlighted with surgical precision. Each showed money moving from Veteran Promise Fund to Havelock Committee, the exact amounts I'd seen disappear from the therapy budget months earlier. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred, then saved every file onto the USB drive Ward had given me. My hands moved calmly, almost automatically. Rage had long since burned itself into focus. Then my encrypted line buzzed. Ward's code, Federal Review ready. Press play equals investigation triggers live. I typed back. Steady, deliberate, understood. Mission set for 1900. The rain began again outside, a soft percussion against the windows. I was locking up when headlights flared across the parking lot. A black SUV slowed to a stop by the gate. My pulse spiked. But then the driver's door opened, and Naomi stepped out. Her hair was damp, her coat soaked through, mascara bleeding under her eyes. She looked smaller in person, young, exhausted, but her expression carried a strange calm. She walked straight toward me, stopping just shy of the overhang where the rain couldn't touch her. She's my grandmother, she said quietly. Her voice cracked once, then steadied. She ruined my mother's life, too. I didn't answer. Some wounds didn't need acknowledgement to be understood. You can end it, Naomi said. Just don't freeze when it counts. I met her gaze, steady. I've trained my whole life not to freeze. Her shoulders dropped, and for the first time that night, she smiled. Not in relief, but in recognition. She reached out, gripped my hand hard enough to leave warmth behind. Then make the world listen, she said. When she turned to leave, the SUV lights cut through the mist, reflecting off the puddles like veins of silver. I stood under the rain until her car disappeared into the distance, the USB cold in my pocket. My path set. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The Havelock dining room glowed in candlelight, a tableau of elegance and deceit. The long white tablecloth shimmered like a river of porcelain. Silver cutlery caught the flame's reflection, each glint sharp enough to cut. A quartet played softly from the corner, strings threading through the air like silk. Evan's hand trembled slightly as he sliced his steak, the blade scraping the porcelain plate with a faint metallic ring. Lorna lifted her glass of wine, swirling it lazily before taking a measured sip. Her smile was the same one that had sold 100 campaign promises. Gracious, composed, lethal. "Tomorrow will be beautiful," she said, setting the glass down with care. "I've arranged everything. The ball will be televised. We'll announce your freedom, gracefully." I folded my napkin across my lap, my voice steady. "Freedom has many definitions. Senator," she tilted her head, studying me the way a sculptor inspects a nearly finished piece, searching for imperfections. "Zelfira," she said, tone dipped in honey. "Power is knowing when to stop fighting." I placed my knife down beside the plate, the sound quiet but deliberate. "And honor," I said, "is knowing when to start." The words hung between us, thin and sharp as glass. The clock on the far wall ticked once, twice, each beat a countdown. No one spoke after that. Only the faint rustle of linen, the whisper of fire, the sound of a family pretending it wasn't at war. When dinner ended, Lorna rose first, her movements precise, queen-like. The faint perfume of white roses lingered in her wake. Evan remained seated. His eyes followed her until she disappeared into the hall. Then he reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. "Please, Z, don't do this," he murmured. "You'll destroy her. And me." I looked at him, seeing not the man I'd once followed into foreign bases, but the shadow that stayed behind, afraid to disobey. My voice was calm. "You destroyed yourself the day you let her speak for you." He froze, hand hovering in midair before retreating. The sound of the clock filled the silence again. He didn't look up as I stood and left. The house was still when I returned to the guest wing. Rain drummed gently against the windows, its rhythm steady and grounding. I opened the wardrobe and pulled out the navy blue uniform that had followed me through deserts and deployments. The fabric had faded, but it still carried the scent of discipline, of order. I laid it across the bed, smoothing the wrinkles with slow precision. Every movement felt ritualistic, pressing the seams, polishing the insignia, reattaching the old medical corps badge I had kept all these years. The metal caught the desk lamp's glow, flashing a muted glint like a heartbeat. On the desk, my phone vibrated once. Ward's message, "Mission confirmed. Going live 1900 hours." My reply, "Copy. Control the narrative." Another ping. A new email from Naomi. I opened it, scanning quickly. "They're testing the AV system now. Lorna's speech file is labeled freedom_speech_final.mp4. Plug your drive into the backup port. It'll override automatically." I typed back. "Understood. Timing is everything." Outside, thunder grumbled low across the sound. I stood by the window, watching lightning split briefly through the mist. It felt like the city itself was holding its breath, waiting. Before turning in, I opened the drawer by my bed. Inside lay a single photo, my father in uniform, standing before a plain wooden barrack, sunlight slanting across his face. I turned it over. The handwriting on the back had faded slightly, but was still legible. "Serve with honor, even when no one's watching." I traced the words with my thumb, the paper soft under my touch. "You taught me how to fight, Dad," I whispered. "Tomorrow, I'll finish it." I slipped the photo into the inner pocket of my jacket, close to my heart, where it had always belonged. It was just past midnight when my phone buzzed again. One single vibration, then stillness. Unknown number. The message read, "They know about the recording. They'll try to cut the feed. No name. Just a single initial at the end. F. Finn." I stared at the screen, the rain outside turning harder, faster. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. I knew what this meant. Lorna had sniffed out the leak. She was moving to control the narrative again, tightening her grip before the show began. I set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and smiled. Then I'll make sure it goes global before they touch a single wire. I pulled back the curtains. The garden below was a blur of wet stone and dim lamplight, the reflection of rain making everything shimmer as if underwater. The house around me was quiet, too quiet, but I didn't need sleep. On the nightstand sat the silver box, the one that had started it all. Its surface gleamed under the low light, the engraved words, "To New Freedom," catching the glow like a blade. I reached out, tracing the lettering with my fingertip. "Tomorrow, they'll give me the stage," I murmured. "And I'll give them the truth." The rain tapped harder against the window, a slow, relentless rhythm. I sat there, listening to it mix with the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and certain. The box stayed where it was, glinting like a promise. Outside, the city waited for dawn. The air inside Fort Lewis Convention Hall shimmered with light, sound, and calculation. Crystal chandeliers refracted gold across the marble floors, and the scent of expensive perfume blended with polished brass. Every table gleamed with precision. Crystal glasses aligned perfectly beside folded napkins, the kind of order only power could afford. The Army Ball had never been a celebration. It was theater, and tonight, I was walking straight onto its stage. The sound of my heels against the marble echoed through the entrance corridor, steady and sharp. The military band in the far corner played a soft march, the notes floating like a memory of order in a room built on pretense. Heads turned as I entered, officers in formal dress, donors in sequined gowns, journalists pretending not to stare. Some whispered my name, others only watched in silence, trying to place the reason my face felt familiar. I wore my old navy blue service uniform. The fabric had faded over the years, but the insignia still gleamed, one from Afghanistan, one for field medical service, and one that no political family could ever take away. On stage, Lorna Havelock glowed beneath the spotlight. Her silver gown caught the light like a mirror, her smile rehearsed to the millimeter. The microphone in her hand wasn't a tool, it was a weapon she wielded effortlessly. "Tonight," she began, her voice resonant and smooth, "we celebrate service, freedom, and family." The crowd applauded on cue. Even the cameras panned gently, as if moved by loyalty. I could see the teleprompter from where I stood, each word scripted to perfection, each pause designed to evoke reverence. Beside me, Evan leaned in close enough for me to feel the tension in his breath. "Just play along, smile." I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. "I am smiling." He looked away first. Lorna lifted her hand, silencing the orchestra mid-note. The ballroom hushed instantly. "And now," she said, "to honor family, I have a gift for my daughter-in-law." Her assistant stepped forward, carrying a small silver box on a velvet tray. The lights dimmed slightly as every gaze followed the box, even before it reached her hands. I knew which box it was. I could feel its weight from across the room. The air thickened as I walked toward the stage. My steps were measured, each one echoing against the marble like the countdown of a fuse. When I reached the podium, the spotlight swung to me, hot, blinding, unflinching. Lorna's smile widened, polished and precise. "Zelphira, darling, may this mark your new freedom." The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. The graceful senator and her humbled daughter-in-law, smiling for America. I lifted the lid. Inside lay the divorce papers, perfectly folded, signed by both parties and witnessed by her. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then came the soft sound of laughter, first from one corner, then another. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone clinked a glass. A few whispered how modern, how brave. The humiliation was meant to be elegant, televised, permanent. I looked up and smiled. Not the smile she expected, but the one that comes before an execution. "Thank you, Senator. Freedom suits me." Then I turned. The stage lights followed. Confused. I crossed to the control table where the AV technician sat, his headset blinking red. Before he could protest, I inserted the black USB into the auxiliary port. The giant LED screen behind Lorna flickered. The Havelock campaign logo vanished, replaced by a black background and a white audio bar pulsing with sound. The first voice came through crisp and unmistakable. "Transfer it before the audit. Lorna's." Then Evan's, layered with calculation. Use the veteran fund. It's cleaner. The entire ballroom froze. The sound cut through the chandeliers, through the breathing of every guest, until it landed squarely in the stunned silence. Someone gasped. A chair scraped against marble. Evan's face went pale, color draining faster than the camera shutters could capture. Lorna tried to laugh. The sound brittle. That's been edited. No. Senator, I said, stepping closer to the microphone. This is your voice. The unedited version. The one you hid. Behind her, the screen shifted again. Graphs. Transaction records. Account numbers. Each one stamped with the seal of the Veteran Promise Fund. Lines of data illuminated the ballroom like evidence carved in light. Then, a new emblem filled the screen. The official insignia of the Department of Defense. Federal Audit Initiated, Ethics Division. The double doors at the end of the hall opened. Colonel Ward entered in full uniform, flanked by 2 federal investigators. The sound of their boots against marble was louder than the orchestra had been all night. Ward's voice carried effortlessly. This is an official review. Senator Havelock, please remain seated. A dozen cameras turned from her to me, recording every reaction, every angle of the moment the narrative slipped from her hands. I stepped forward, my voice even, clear, resonant. Some of us serve our country quietly. Others serve themselves loudly. You gave me a stage, Senator. I just chose to speak the truth. A long moment passed. Then, from the far back of the room, someone began to clap. An older officer, uniform crisp, eyes glinting with something between respect and relief. The applause grew, hesitant at first, then swelling. Officers, donors, even reporters rising to their feet. The sound rolled through the hall like thunder. Lorna's mask cracked. Her hand trembled around the microphone before she lowered it. Evan sat frozen beside her, face buried in his hands. The lights, once flattering, now seemed merciless. I reached up and unclipped the gold Havelock crest pinned to my lapel, the emblem they'd made me wear to prove I belonged. I placed it gently on the table beside her untouched glass of champagne. You can keep this, I said. It never belonged to me. The flashbulbs burst again, but this time the story they captured wasn't hers. The spotlight caught my face as I straightened my shoulders. It wasn't the glow of celebration. It was the hard, white light of truth. And it burned beautifully. I raised my hand in salute. Steady, deliberate, final. Then turned and walked down the aisle. Behind me, the applause built until it filled the entire room. It didn't sound like a cheer. It sounded like something older, like a drumline, a reckoning. By the time I reached the door, Colonel Ward's voice followed through the noise. Calm and sure. You did your duty, Major. I didn't turn back. The night air outside was cold, sharp with the scent of rain and freedom. For a moment, the echoes from the ballroom still thundered in my chest. Truth. Applause. Chaos. I took a deep breath and let it all fall away. Freedom suits me, I whispered once more. Then I stepped into the rain. Seattle woke in silence. The kind of silence that feels earned, like the world itself had decided to take a breath. The rain fell in a steady drizzle, rinsing away the glitter, the noise, the spectacle of the night before. I stood in my kitchen barefoot, the floor cold against my skin, the coffee machine humming softly as it brewed. The air smelled of rain and roasted beans. The same house that had once felt like a waiting room for someone else's life finally felt still, unclaimed, unperformed. When I turned on the television, every channel echoed the same headline. Senator Havelock under federal investigation. Army Major exposes corruption at Veterans Fund. Footage rolled again and again. The stage, the lights, the stunned faces. And there I was, on the screen, standing in uniform, microphone in hand, voice calm and precise. They called it bravery. They called it justice. But what I saw wasn't triumph. It was duty. Just another mission completed. The coffee was bitter, but I drank it anyway. It grounded me. A knock came from the door. 3 soft raps, hesitant. When I opened it, Evan stood there, not the polished man from campaign posters, but someone stripped bare. His tie was gone, His shirt was wrinkled. His face looked older than I remembered. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said. His voice was rough, low, like he hadn't slept. I leaned against the doorway. "That's the problem. Evan, you never knew how far wrong could go." He swallowed, eyes darting from me to the floor. "I loved you, Z." I nodded, not with anger, not with forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "Then you should have protected me when it mattered." His hands trembled. Maybe he wanted to say something more, maybe to apologize, maybe to rewrite a history that couldn't be fixed. But words failed him. The same way courage had. I turned back to the kitchen table, where the papers waited. The real divorce documents, the ones I'd drafted myself, untouched by her signature or her control. I uncapped the pen, signed neatly at the bottom, and dated it. No hesitation, no shaking, no tears. "Love without respect is captivity," I said quietly, "and I've served enough time." He stood there for a moment longer, jaw tight, eyes wet, but proud enough not to let it show. Then he turned and left. The door closed softly behind him. For the first time in years, there was no sound left in the house except the faint rhythm of rain and the hum of the coffee maker. By afternoon, the rain had thinned into mist. The city's traffic picked up again, cautious but alive. I returned to my office, the same small room where everything had started. The smell of paper, ink, and disinfectant was still familiar, still grounding. When the door opened, I didn't look up right away. I thought it might be a reporter, maybe someone from the Defense Department. Instead, Colonel Ward stepped in, rain still glistening on his coat. He didn't salute. He didn't even smile. He just set a small silver box on my desk, the same size as the one that had once held my humiliation. This one bore a new engraving, "For service beyond duty." He opened it carefully, the hinge creaking faintly. Inside lay a medal, the Medal for Ethical Service, awarded by the Department of Defense to those who defended honor when it was easier not to. Ward's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "You served honor when no one was watching. That's the highest service." The light from the window hit the medal just right, casting a shimmer across the desk. The reflection landed exactly where the old silver box had once sat, the symbol of someone else's control, now replaced by something that finally belonged to me. I reached out, tracing the edge of the medal with my thumb. It was heavier than I expected, real, solid, earned. Freedom was never theirs to give. I said, "It was mine all along." Ward gave a short nod, the kind soldiers use when words aren't enough. He turned to leave, pausing just before the door. "There's peace in what you did," he said. "It doesn't always look like peace, but it feels like it." After he left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. The city outside blurred into silver and gray. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed faintly, but they felt far away. Someone else's story now. I looked at the medal one last time, then placed it back into the box and closed the lid. "For service beyond duty." The words stayed with me. Freedom wasn't a ceremony, or applause, or headlines. It was this. Quiet, unadorned, honest, the kind you carry alone, without needing anyone's permission to claim it, the kind you can finally live in. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The light shifted, softer now, warmer. I turned off the TV, poured another cup of coffee, and let the silence stay. A year later, Seattle looked softer, quieter. The rain still came every afternoon, but it no longer felt like a weight. It was cleansing, steady, patient. The city had moved on from the scandal that once burned through every headline, but I hadn't forgotten. I just no longer carried it like armor. The Veterans Healing Center stood on a quiet hill just outside the city. Once an abandoned school gym, it had been rebuilt into a refuge, wide windows letting in rainlight, walls covered with handmade art from former patients, and a smell that mixed disinfectant with cinnamon from the cafeteria below. I stood behind the curtain, waiting for my cue. The small auditorium buzzed with the low hum of conversation, the shuffle of prosthetic limbs, the laughter of people who had learned to live with their ghosts. These were not politicians or donors. They were the reason I'd stayed, the soldiers who had faced war and come home to fight themselves. Through the thin fabric of the curtain, I could see them, faces etched with fatigue and light, survivors of every kind. Some wore old uniforms, some jeans, some had medals, others scars. None of it mattered anymore. No one here was performing. The MC, a Marine veteran with a gentle voice and an old burn scar curling up his neck, stepped to the microphone. "Our keynote speaker," he said, pausing with a small smile. "Major Zelphira Grant." The applause was soft but sincere. I took a slow breath and stepped forward. The stage lights washed the room in gold, not the sterile white of cameras, but the warm kind that made the air feel alive. A single microphone waited at the center, trembling slightly as I adjusted it. No broadcast, no media, just people. I looked at them, their faces, their posture, their quiet patience, and began. "Healing begins," I said. "When you stop apologizing for surviving." The words came easier than I expected. They didn't echo like a speech. They settled, heavy and true, in the air between us. And freedom begins when you stop waiting for permission to have it. Silence followed. Real silence. Not the awkward kind, not expectant, just understanding. For a moment, no one moved. Then one man in the front row, missing a leg, his crutch propped against the chair, nodded once, slow and sure. A woman beside him pressed her lips together, eyes wet, and then it began. One pair of hands clapping, then another, and another, no cheering, no standing ovations meant to impress anyone. Just that slow, rhythmic applause that said, "We get it." The sound grew, filling the hall, not as noise but as breath, as life. When it faded, no one rushed to speak. We all stayed still, letting the quiet return like an old friend. After the ceremony, the crowd lingered, exchanging handshakes, stories, and half-smiles that carried more truth than any speech could. I slipped away through the side door, down a narrow hallway lined with photographs, portraits of veterans taken on their first day at the center, and again 6 months later. The change in their eyes was subtle, but unmistakable. The evening light outside had turned honey-colored, the kind that makes the city look like it's exhaling. I walked slowly, the sound of my boots echoing softly against the linoleum. In my hand, I carried the old silver box. Its once glossy surface had dulled over time. Its engraved letters, "To New Freedom," faded almost to invisibility. I reached a window at the end of the hall. From there, I could see the skyline, gray buildings catching streaks of orange light, the faint shimmer of Puget Sound in the distance, and a world that no longer needed me to prove anything. I set the box on the windowsill and opened it. Inside, there were no papers, no threats, no symbols of someone else's control, only a single photograph, edges worn soft by time. My father stood in uniform, the wind tugging at his jacket, his smile small but certain. On the back, the handwriting was smudged, but still legible, "Serve with honor." I stared at the picture for a long time. There had been a time when I thought serving with honor meant obedience, saying yes, staying quiet, keeping peace for the sake of others. Now, I knew better. Sometimes, honor is rebellion. I slipped the photo into the breast pocket of my jacket, close to my heart. The box felt lighter without it, like it had finally released whatever hold it once had. Outside, dusk had fallen. The courtyard glistened with thin puddles, catching the reflections of the building's soft lights. A few of the veterans lingered by the entrance, their laughter echoing faintly through the rain. I passed them with a nod, not wanting to interrupt their small joy. The air was cool, the kind that made you breathe deeper. Each inhale tasted like rain, metal, and pine. I stopped under the awning, letting the drizzle speckle my hands. The city stretched ahead, familiar, imperfect, alive. Freedom, I whispered to myself, was never about leaving them. The words came without bitterness. It's about returning to yourself. I started walking down the path that led away from the center. The pavement was slick, my reflection trailing beside me like a companion I'd finally learned to trust. The rain fell light and even, tapping against my shoulders, my face, my hands. It wasn't cold anymore. It felt like something else entirely, like forgiveness. Each step sounded like closure, but not the kind that erases the past, the kind that absorbs it, integrates it, and keeps moving. The silver box swung lightly in my grip, empty now except for air. Maybe someday I'd throw it away. Maybe I'd keep it as a reminder that sometimes the things that broke you are the same things that built you back. Behind me, the healing center glowed through the mist. Through the glass, I could see the veterans gathering again, laughing, helping each other with coats, wiping rain off chairs. No ceremonies, no speeches, just life continuing. That was the truth I'd spent years searching for. Not justice, not vindication, but this quiet continuity. The way people keep going after everything collapses. The way the world insists on turning even when you've fallen still. I reached the gate, turned once, and looked back. The building's light shimmered against the wet pavement, reflected like a heartbeat in water. Then I turned forward again. I didn't rush. The night didn't demand it. The drizzle softened into a mist, curling around the streetlights until everything looked golden. The city hummed quietly, alive and unbothered, and somewhere in the quiet rhythm of the rain, I realized that the silence I carried all those years, the silence I once mistook for defeat, had changed. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was peace, and for the first time in a very long time, that silence, that peace, belonged entirely to me.